Well, the nation is also divided when it comes to the COVID vaccine. President Biden's recent vaccine mandate has people on both sides of the fence, some who are rolling up their sleeves and others who are walking off their jobs against it. So this has also created division among families, with some giving into pressure to keep the peace. Florida's newly appointed Surgeon General, Joseph Ladapo, says the COVID vaccine is being treated like a religion, and it is not an end-all treatment for the disease. Joining me now are the hosts of the All Rev'd Up podcast, where faith intersects with politics and culture, Reverend Irene Moreau and Reverend Dr. Emmett G. Price III. Welcome to you both. I'm happy to see you guys back here on BNC.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah, definitely. And Reverend Moreau, we'll start with you. People across the country, including frontline workers, are walking off their jobs because they don't want to get vaccinated. Florida's newly appointed Surgeon General, who I just mentioned, says the vaccine is being treated like a religion. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. One of the things that we got to recognize is that as a country, we all have COVID fatigue, whether we're adhering to the CDC guidelines or not. But with that fatigue here, we have to generate new ways to convince people why that this is a marathon, that this will not go away. And he said it. You said more kids, more students are now out and about. More people are going to sports events. But I live with an ER physician. My spouse is an ER physician, and what her hospital did was mandate that if you are healthcare, in healthcare, you have to take the vaccine. What I've done on a religious level is I gave a sermon today because so many showed up, which I was surprised about being the good Samaritan and what it means to live in community in a time of a pandemic.
And Reverend Price, the vaccine debate is also dividing families. She mentioned in the church, with some giving in into the peer pressure to say basically you got to vaccinate. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, this is a difficult season for the nation and for human beings in general. Something that should bring us together, this crisis of a pandemic, is actually tearing us apart because of the misinformation, the disinformation, and the divisiveness and the politicization of this moment. And so, whether one is vaccinated or unvaccinated, I think people have a decision. People have a decision to make about what they will do with their bodies. However, that decision has to be relative to our coexisting and living in this world, in this country, in this nation, in this, around this world together. And so I think the challenge is that the numbers do not lie. 701,157 dead in the United States, 4,801,011 dead around the world. Those numbers do not lie. Dr. Rowland just shared that we need to get back to what it was that we were doing before we had the vaccines, which is wearing your mask, social distancing, washing your hands, and understanding that we are in relationship with one another.
And Reverend Moreau, have you seen that divide also among the clergy as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we got to understand about this pandemic, it hits different demographic groups differently, those who are anti-vaxxers. For instance, if you're African-American, you will get, and you're part of the African diaspora, you certainly will get the argument, and rightly so, about the history of, malpractice, medical experimentation, health disparities. And of course, we know the story about the Tuskegee study, and then a more recent, incident with Henrietta Lacks with her quote immortal cells here. So you have that demographic group, because that group is sometimes very different than what you say white evangelicals. So their reason is not based so much on religion, and it's not about a dislike or a cognitive dissonance between what religion says and what the healthcare profession says. It's about a deep mistrust. I'll tell you something what one of my parishioners said this morning to me, and who is not vaccinated, said this. He says, I'm suspicious of the vaccine. And I said, so why? He says, because I can get the vaccine free, walk in any drugstore in Massachusetts. But if I want a COVID test to see if I'm negative or positive, I have to pay hundreds of dollars. So those kind of little small, what we might think minutia issues have to be addressed. When you're talking about white evangelicals, they will use religion, and they will say like J&J is compromised because they're using an aborted fetus. So, I mean, we got to sort of communicate and message our, pro-vaccine campaign to different demographic groups. And then for the LGBT community, which I deal with, they don't want to get vaccinated because they'll be misgendered, seen as other, and they feel like their bodies are being experimented with by the mere fact that you don't see the totality of who they are.
Yeah. And Reverend Price, what do you say? Some people are against the COVID vaccine for religious reasons. What have you been able to speak? How have you been able to speak to them for those folks who say that they don't want to get it because of those reasons?
Well, I mean, there are various religions around the world. We should not perceive that everybody's Christian, but for those who are Christians, I think, the second part of John 10:10 is my favorite, that Jesus said, I came that you might have life and life more abundantly. For folks who are not necessarily Christians, but who have a spiritual journey, a spiritual path, I think all of the spiritual journeys and paths talk about life, talk about vitality, talk about coexistence, talk about understanding that you are part of a greater being. And so even as we make difficult decisions, and there are some who need to make a decision based on where they are in terms of their health journey, in terms of their spiritual life. I think the simple fact is this, that before we had the vaccine, we understood to keep the mask on, the social distance, and to also respect each other's proximity. Now that we do have the vaccine, it is our hope that individuals will actually do their research, find the data that is out there, and understand that there is more data that shows that these vaccines are keeping people from dying, even if they do get the illness. So I think the facts are there. People have to have access to the information without it being divisive.
Well, can I say something though?
We're out of time, Rev, but I would love to have you both back. I just want to make sure that our viewers can know where to find your podcast so they can hear more of these discussions before we let you go.
The All Rev'd Up podcast, All Rev'd Up, ALLREVDUP.org, and also on wherever you get your podcast, All Rev'd Up.
Awesome. We will have you both back. Thank you so much for your time tonight.